Record the lecture and begin. Okay, everybody, welcome. Our agenda today is to move toward our orthopedic unit. And when we discuss the word orthopedic, we include bones, muscles, and nerves. When we talk about bones, we talk about the study of osteology, as you can see on the overhead. Osteology is the study of bone structure and the disorders of those bone structures. We look at the function, we look at the anatomy. A lot of our lab looks at the gross anatomy of the muscle, of the bones, and our lecture goes more into the diseases and the functionality. Now, first off, I just want to discuss where we're beginning in the textbook. Go to page 542. We're in chapter 14. We begin a look at the morphology. Morphology means shape, the shape of the bones. And we've got four types of shapes: long, short, flat, and irregular on figure 14.29. If you want to feel your elbow joint, when we think about the word orthopedic unit, the orthopedics are talking about how the joints move, how you feel pain, how you have good or bad functionality. Orthopedics involve not just understanding the word bone. When you think of an orthopedic surgeon, you think of bones, but really bones do not exist singularly in the body. The bone is what? Connected together with another bone, generally, and it moves, and that's your joint. Your articulation is your joint. And the bone itself has connections from one bone to another, ligaments and tendons that we talked about, right? There's cartilage at the ends of the long bones to cushion and protect. And additionally, there's muscles around those bones. What goes to every muscle? A nerve. So move your elbow like so, and you will note the beauty of the structure. You have protection. Your bones protect what's inside, and yet you're able to move. The whole theory behind orthopedic or physical medicine is to strengthen the joints. And how do you strengthen the joints? You can't do a whole heck of a lot about what you're given. If your articular cartilage is wearing away, or if your joint is structured in such a way that it can easily be damaged, you're given that genetics. But what you can do is strengthen the muscle around it. And that is the point of physical medicine, to strengthen the muscle around the joints to prevent damage to the joints. Take your hand and push it. Push your head against your hand, and you're pretty much stretching and strengthening the muscles around your neck by doing that. Now put your hand behind your head and push backward. You are strengthening the muscles around your neck. Again, what does that do? The point of physical medicine in that regard is to strengthen the muscles around the bones that come together, in other words, the joints, and therefore protect it. So that's a principle of physical medicine. And so this unit that we're beginning, and exam 3, of course, is the orthopedic unit: bones, muscles, and nerves. We start with the bones. So osteology, again, the study of bones, and you don't understand bones unless you understand cartilage. And we last left off in histology with cartilage. The three types of cartilage: fibrocartilage, elastic cartilage, and hyaline cartilage. And as you recall, the cartilage that is found in the backbone, for example, is fibrocartilage, protecting the bones of the vertebrae. The elastic cartilage in your ear, and the hyaline cartilage, let's say in your nose and at the ends of long bones. All of these are in a way protective of the bone within the joint. What is it about cartilage? Well, cartilage has a lot of water. It is, we know, avascular and has a perichondrium that surrounds it, that is made of dense, irregular connective tissue. To make a long story short, the bones are protected by the cartilage, one way or another. Think of it that way. And we've discussed cartilage as being that cushiony material in between bones. Okay, let's talk about the functions of bones. What's the functionality of bones? And in the textbook, we go over the functions of bones to the general structure of bones, to some of the principles and of remodeling and diseases of bones. Starting off, most people know the first aspect of the physiology of bones is support and protection. To support and protect what's underneath. All right, if you take a look at the chest cavity, you've got a sternum that is superficial to the heart. You need a sternum, a flat sternum that's sturdy, not taking up a lot of space, and protecting the heart. Protection and support are difficult to maintain in movable creatures. We're very movable. And if we're a turtle, for example, and you just have a shell, you got a lot of protection, but how much movement? You ever see a turtle go on its back? Not a lot of movement, right? We, function number 3, have movement. And that's a fascinating area of bone study because it looks at the joints. We are not only able to protect ourselves, but we are also able to move relatively freely through the environment. And that requires joints that are cushioned by the cartilage that I just mentioned, but also strengthened by the muscle around that joint to keep the bones from rubbing together. Just rub your two fists together like this. As bone rubs on bone, it builds up bone spurs. Bone spurs are literally, you know, if you want to use a fancy word, arthritis. And little spurs that pop out cause inflammation and pain. And it is known as pretty much wear and tear arthritis, known as osteoarthritis. So getting back to our functionality, support, protection, and movement are what we most think of when we think of the functions of the bones. But we don't think about the next 3, mineral homeostasis. We all have memorized that, you know, vitamin D and calcium give us strong bones and teeth. We learned that in high school. But where is most of it held? 99% of your calcium and much of your phosphorus is held in the bones. And I remember taking a final exam in cell bio on, it was a difficult class. I'll leave it at that. The final, you had to write for 4 hours straight about calcium. That's it. There were 2 words, discuss calcium, and you had to write 4 hours. And that's because calcium does a lot in the body. Calcium's needed in muscle contraction. Calcium's needed in heart functioning. Calcium's needed in nerve activity. Calcium's needed, you know, the list goes on, strengthening the bones. So mineral homeostasis, you store those minerals, calcium and phosphorus, in the bones to draw from it when you need it in the body. And there are many, many reactions, clotting, different enzyme reactions, different hormone production, a lot of places where calcium is needed. So hopefully I impressed upon you 4 hours worth of calcium discussion. Continuing along, red blood cell production. Okay. And remember, this is in chapter 14 of the textbook, not chapter 6, okay? It is in chapter 14. I just want to make that clear. So, okay, moving along. Whoops. Sorry about that. Playing around with the new computer. Red blood cell production, white blood cell production, and platelet production occurs in what we call the spongy part of bone. There's 2 types of bone. We're going to get into that shortly. Spongy and compact. Spongy has a lot of holes, looks like a sponge. Compact does not. Has very few holes and is very strong and sturdy. And red blood cell production occurs in those holes of the spongy bone. And I have here the word RBC, that's red blood cell, WBC, that's white blood cell, and platelet. That is little clotting factors, little parts of cells that all are produced in the, what we say, red marrow of the bone. Usually in the hip, the femur, the humerus, mostly at the ends of the bones. And we're going to go over the general structure of the bone in a moment. One thing that no one talks about, very few professors, is the storage of energy in the bone. When I was a kid, my parents were from Europe, so they ate every part of, a pig or a chicken. They'd break the bone of the chicken and eat out the inside. We call it the yellow bone marrow, and they'd scrape out the fat in the yellow marrow. Absolutely disgusting to me. Some people love it. Does anyone like it? I mean, you can add that in the chat room if you like it, because I hate it, and I would never eat Kentucky Fried Chicken, then break a bone and eat the inside. But anyway, has a lot. I mean, my parents loved it. It has a lot of fat and energy storage, and I guess years ago you really needed it. Probably makes good soup. You have chicken noodle soup, you got to put the chicken in. I've never made it, but my wife has, and you got to have the chicken in so that the yellow marrow comes out and the fat of the soup is tasty. So anyway, there we go, a little bit of cooking discussion. But here's the structure of the long bone, okay? Here's the anatomy of the long bone. I want you to see that the long bone is longer than it is short. That's its main feature. The ends have articular cartilage that cover the ends of the long bone. The yellow marrow that I just talked about is in what we call the shaft, or the diaphysis of the bone. You see that word, diaphysis? That's the shaft of the bone. And in the epiphysis, or end of the bone, that's what it's called, that's where you have the spongy bone. You see the dots? That's the spongy bone. That's the red marrow, where you have red blood cell, white blood cell, and platelet production. The articular cartilage covers both ends of the long bone to protect it, insulate it, and cushion it. The periosteum is the covering of the bone that is not the articular cartilage. And the periosteum, again, that's the covering of the bone. It's just a little covering. It's made of two parts, a fibrous periosteum and an osteogenic periosteum. The fibrous periosteum is the protector on the outside of the bone. It's made of Sharpie's fibers, in other words, collagen tufts, that protect the outer layer. And this layer secures the periosteum to ligaments and tendons, for example, and to the bone itself. The osteogenic layer is nearer to the bone surface. It builds up and breaks down the bone. The osteogenic layer is right on the inside of the periosteum, laying, again, as I said, right on top of the bone. And it has osteoclasts, which break down the bone, and osteoblasts, which build up bone. Bone is constantly growing and repairing itself, all right? And the periosteum is what does it. Periosteum, osteogenic layer, has those bone cells to build up and break down. In other words, remodel the bone underneath it. We know that the periosteum is a point of attachment for ligaments and tendons. And in today's labs that I sent to you, and in this week's labs, you don't just memorize the bones, okay? I don't just get into, what is the humerus? Whoops, sorry. What is the humerus? But we talk about what little bumps are on the humerus, like this is the medial epicondyle right here. And I just want to emphasize that it's not that I'm just a nasty anatomist, that I make you know what we call the bone markings. Markings are the little surface areas on the bones. They are often points of attachment. A foramen is a hole allowing nerves and blood vessels through, right? So here's your supraorbital foramen. Nerves and blood vessels have to go through. So there are little markings or little surface landmarks on the bones that I want you to know for the practical. And anyway, to make a long story short, that's the reason I have you learn them. Points of attachments for ligaments and for tendons and other different goodies that happen on the bone. I would say that the bone is about 1/3 organic and 2/3 inorganic. What does that mean? Organic, is defined as we know, carbon-containing compound. For the most part, that means living material that has carbon. Cells, proteins, collagen fibers, elastic fibers, all of these things have proteins and have carbon, and they're living, like the cartilage that I talked about. The inorganic 2/3 of the bone is literally like limestone, calcium carbonate, another chemical known as hydroxyapatite, Ca3PO42.OH2. That's the formula for hydroxyapatite. Why is that important? Because it shows you that phosphorus and calcium are stored in the bones. This is where your mineral salts are stored. When you think about it, really, we are really just stone structures. 2/3 of our bone is stone, non-living really. While it's alive, it's mostly mineral storage. And as a result of the general structure, you will note, and if you look on page, I suppose 545, figure 14.31, that's your general structure of the bone, okay? And I have some various pictures of the bones here for you to kind of reflect on, feel different parts of your own bone. You know, like I think on page 544, I have you go through about 8 different things to feel parts of your own bones. So if you feel behind your ears, the roughened part, that's your mastoid process. All of this is structures that are very strong. We say that bone is half as strong as steel in terms of its compression. So you never see a chubby person that will just buckle under the weight of their own body. It'll never happen because it's half as strong as steel. That's pretty strong. And tension, it's as strong as steel in terms of tension. You cannot pull a bone apart very easily, right? And the tensile strength, in other words, the pulling strength of bone is enormous, even more than the compressive. Either way, they're both very strong. And one of the reasons for it is the compact bone. The compact bone is made of what we call osteons. An osteon is a concentric ring-like structure or a pillar of support with collagen fibers running in circular parallel arrangements, and at the same time, calcium salts impregnated within those collagen fibers. And they're running in opposite directions to withstand the torque. Torque being circular pressures. Now, if we look at an osteon, there's got to be a few holes. There's a hole here for a blood vessel. There's little holes along the sides for communication between different cells. And let's take a look close at one of the little holes. There are little lakes or lagoons strewn throughout this osteon. And if we look close at it, you would find that there's an osteocyte, which, as you know from the last class, is a bone cell, and a little canal going back and forth from one osteocyte to another. The place where the osteocyte sits is known as the lacuna. You can remember that because a lagoon is like an open water area, and a lacuna is Latin for that. I'm making that up. I don't know exactly if that's the Latin word where it comes from, but sounds good, right? Anyway, you can remember that. A little lagoon where the osteocyte sits and performs all of its normal operating procedures to control the bone. So the canaliculi are canals that connect the lacuna. The lacuna are the little lagoons in which the osteocyte or the bone cell sits. That's how the compact bone is arranged, so that you allow communication and functionality of the compact bone, but at the same time, what a beautiful arrangement, right? You've got tons of strength, strong as steel, right? Spongy bone, not so much. Spongy bone has little trabeculae. Trabeculae are little plates of bone that look kind of haphazard, and the osteocytes sit within the trabeculae. This is very spongy. If you take a look at figure 14.36, you will see, I'm showing you osteoporosis, which is a disease or thinning of the bone. But you'll see all the little dots. That's a picture of the spongy bone, all right? You can also see it in figure 14.35 at the edges. They're spongy bones. When you see holes in the bones, it's spongy. Moving along, we have 4 types of bone cells. And I think we talked a little bit about blastocytes and clasts already, but I really want to emphasize this, that all cells come from something called mesenchyme. Mesenchyme is embryonic connective tissue. And I believe you saw a picture of it in the 4th lab, and you've already been tested on it. And osteoprogenitor cells come from the mesenchyme, and they carry out mitosis, and they become osteoblasts. So what am I talking about? Osteoprogenitor cells are the embryonic bone tissue that will develop into immature bone cells known as osteoblasts. Osteoblasts secrete collagen and other materials to, quote, make bones. Just remember the word blast. The word blast, you just blast out new material. I always think of it in terms of like insulation, where they go to an attic and blast out insulation to insulate your attic. I've seen that done once, but you're literally blasting out new material. That's what any blast does. So an osteoblast makes new bone, and an osteoclast breaks down bone, all right? And an osteocyte merely maintains the daily activities of the bone. That's the picture I just showed you here. That's an osteocyte. It sits in the bone to carry out the normal functioning of the bone. So how do you make bone? How do you make bone? I love bone. I mean, I never broke a bone, so I was just gonna say I love breaking bones. I don't love to break a bone, but I love how well a bone heals. In 6 to 8 weeks, a bone heals. How does it heal? It's a process known as ossification. Ossification means bone formation. Another word they don't use much is osteogenesis. Either way, all that means is bone formation. And you can Google a picture of an embryo. I have some pictures later in the book with embryos, but chapter 16. But I don't want to rush through that now. I guess, you want to look. You got on page 635, figure 16.28, there's an embryo. That little embryo has a bone structure by week 8, and its bone structure is mostly hyaline cartilage. And those bones in that structure undergo something known as endochondral ossification, where the mesenchyme or embryonic connective tissue becomes hyaline cartilage and then becomes bone. All bones go through that process of endochondral ossification. They become hyaline cartilage and then they become bone, except for a few select bones, which undergo something known as intramembranous ossification. That means they form within loose, fibrous connective tissue membranes. Look at your skull and look at your clavicles. The skull and clavicles, all those bones, skull and clavicle, go through intramembranous ossification. So if you don't know the answer, write endochondral, because all bones go through that, except for skull and clavicle bones. Are you able to hear all that street noise? That's my question. Let me know. Send it through the chat room. You can say yes or no, because a bunch of trucks came by, and I just want to see how much you guys have to go through if I'm outside. All right. Okay. Last but not least, we talked about. Let's go back a little bit because I don't want to rush. We talked about spongy versus compact bone. We talked about how hard bone is. We talked about the different types of bones sitting in the matrix and how bone is made. We did not talk about how fascinating bone remodeling is. Let me give you a law, and you should commit this to memory. Bones remodel according to the forces placed upon them, okay? That is known as Wolff's Law. By the way, I'm putting my coffee on the floor. Never going to put coffee on my keyboard again. Now I'm going to walk around. I walk. All right, I walk. Why do you want to walk? Why do you want to tell old people to walk? Why do you want to walk? When you walk and put pressure on your legs, you remodel the bone. You put forces on it. And those forces stimulate osteoblasts to make more material. And there is definitely evidence. If you Google shaft, long bone, thickness, you will find that the place that is most thickest, that is most likely to break, according to Euler's buckling equation, is somewhere in the center where it's most likely to break. It'll be thickest. All right, so interesting that you can predict where the long bone is most likely to break, and the body will remodel that spot to be thicker than all the others because of the forces that are placed upon it. I always found that to be fascinating. So what's the take-home message? I think on the test, I'm going to ask you, Wolff's Law, and you got to know that forces placed upon bones make them remodel. All right, that's just a fact. And that's why exercise is important in strengthening bones and preventing osteoporosis or thinning of bones. Now, I will tell you that evidence is even seen in thin bone, right, in spongy bone trabeculae. Those trabeculae, again, are the little thin sheets. You can Google better pictures than I have, right, in these notes, but trabeculae give you nice images of, give you a lot of support in the spongy bone, and they will thicken as forces are placed upon them. There's a little picture here of just a tube. This is a tube, and I guess, you can use your grade sheet as a little tube. And where is this most likely to buckle? If I keep pushing on this, right, on this tube, eventually, I just pushed it, but it's going to buckle. This side, see this side? That goes into compression, and this side goes into tension. Which side breaks? This side, the side in tension, right? The side in tension is pulling apart. So whenever you have a break, you can predict that it's the side in tension that breaks, all right? That's what rips apart. The side in compression is not going to break. The side in tension is going to break, and it's going to push itself all the way through. So when you have like a ripped tendon or a broken bone, the break will always happen on the side of tension. And by the way, if your tendon is ripped more than 50%, you got to have surgery. Some golden rules, everybody, to live by. And we think electrical signals may prompt the osteocytes and osteoblasts and osteoclasts to build and break down bones. Okay. What I want to do now is talk about some of these breaks. We discussed a little bit about breaks and where the break happens on the side of tension. Number one, whenever you have a fracture, or the word fracture means a break in the bone, you always have a hematoma. The word hematoma you should commit to memory. That's a blood clot. Hema is blood, and toma is, like a congestion area. So, I hit myself in the head once with a racquetball racket. I'm not the most, I wouldn't have been a good surgeon, I'll tell you. I'm not the most coordinated. But anyway, I hit myself in the head with a racquetball racket. And I had this bump that was just endlessly there. Hematoma. Nothing serious. Outside of the skull, not a big deal, but that's a hematoma. And what happens with the hematoma, if you break the bone, is, right, because you can have a hematoma anywhere, and it's not a bone break, it's just a blood clot. But when you do break the bone, a fibrocartilage callus forms, and you have that type of ossification that I'm talking about, endochondral ossification, where then a bony callus forms, and finally a remodeling occurs. You will have a migration of all these cells, macrophages, immune cells, connective tissues, regenerating the area, and fibroblasts blasting out new material. So this is the 4 phases of a fracture. First, a blood clot to stop the bleeding, then a fibrocartilage callus, and the word callus probably is a, of words like callus, an area that's in process, okay? Like if you have a calloused foot, you have a thickened area. There's a process going on. So a fibrocartilage callus, which then ossifies to become a bony callus, which then remodels. They say a broken bone is stronger than the original, because the body overcompensates and makes it generally a bit stronger. So again, Wolff's Law. But moving along to fractures, we're going to classify fractures as clean breaks versus and with skin penetration versus clean breaks without skin penetration. A simple break is one without skin penetration, so it's not as serious. Compound means you've even broken through the skin. All right. And we have 7 types of breaks. Comminuted, compression, depression, spiral, green stick, impacted, and epiphyseal. In the interest of time, well, maybe I should show you a couple of little imagery from it. Let's do fractures, x-rays. Why don't we go over these a little bit visual? Let's do a little fun. Okay, I'll just go through a little bit. Okay. Because a picture's 1,000 words. I don't know. Let's do let's do green stick. We'll go through. A green stick fracture is an incomplete break. As you can see here, an incomplete break. You know, like it usually happens in younger people, sports injuries, where the break is not complete. The word green stick refers to a tree. If you break a live tree, it doesn't just break completely. Just like with the kid, the bones are still softer, even up to adolescence, up to 21, 24 even. The bones are still, they're softer, and that's not a good picture of one. That's a terrible picture of one. I don't even think that is a picture of one. Here, a partial break. There's some better ones. I like this one. That's the best one. Partially broken here, not broken here. Again, going back to a young tree, you break it, it doesn't break completely. A young person, you break the bone, doesn't break completely. The more kind of fully calcified it is, the more it can break completely. You know what I mean? So the bones are still soft, still have more organic matrix in them when you're younger. Let's do, let me see where I'm at. All right, so we'll do comminuted, many fragments. Let's do comminuted. I'm still getting used to the new computer, everybody, by the way. Even though I spent my way out of the problem, that doesn't mean that I'm great at computers. Okay, let's view all. Comminuted is like multiple breaks. You can see that right here. You see multiple breaks here. A lot of breaks, many fragments. Elderly, because the elderly have brittle bones, so there's a lot of breaking. Compression, that's mostly in vertebrae. I'll show you a vertebrae. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, there's a compression fracture. You can see the breaks here in the neck. Let me see, is that the neck vertebrae? No, it's a lumbar vertebrae. Let's see a neck one. No, that's not neck. Well, all right, regardless. You can see that there's multiple, a compression fracture means, what does that mean? There's been compressive forces pushing upon them, and it crushes the bone into many little parts. They used to like inject a type of cement, or they still do, into the vertebrae of elderly when they have a compression fracture to kind of glue together the whole thing. You know, that's been back and forth on how efficient that is. I mean, how successful that is. What other goodies? We'll do a depression fracture. That I won't show you a picture. That's just a bone pressed inward. Like, that's a serious one. You get hit in the head with a bat, a billy club, and then it's a depression fracture, a bone pressed inward. Spiral is a twisting fracture. Impacted is when one is pushed upon the other. Epiphyseal is the weirdest. I have to show you the picture of the epiphyseal. Epiphyseal is when literally the diaphysis and epiphysis slide apart. Usually it's in younger people because, or they pull apart, and that's because I have some really good pictures in the classroom, but I don't have them here. They slide apart, everybody. Here it is. Here it is. Oh my God. Horrible. Do you see it? Yes. The diaphysis here, right? The shaft falls off of the epiphysis. This is your growth plate, everyone. And that's known as your epiphyseal plate. The plate in between your epiphysis, the end of the long bone, and the diaphysis, the shaft of the long bone. So that's not fully developed in young people. So this is a fracture of young people where a lateral force, a side force, pushes off the end of the bone from the shaft of the bone. And that's, again, because the growth plate's not fully ossified. So some interesting stuff. I had some fun with this, but whoa, that. I've had a lot of students that have had an epiphyseal fracture, and they're not freaked out. They're like, it wasn't too bad. You just push it back on top, and it ossifies again. So that was interesting. I don't know. Green stick, spiral, depression, compression, comminuted, impacted, epiphyseal. Just, be aware of those. Last but not least, let's talk osteoporosis. Osteoporosis, I have a figure 14.36. Figure 14.36 gives you a picture of just some holes in the bones. I have some better pictures. Now I'm getting, whoops, no. Let's do some pictures of osteoporosis. I don't really want to make this a show and tell, but imagery is good when we do some of the anatomy. You just can't quite explain it as well as looking at it. I like this one. Look at the difference between the two bones on each side, right? This is a normal bone. Whoops. What's going on here? Advertisements. WebMD. All right, forget it. We'll just go here. Look at the difference between the two sides. This is your normal spongy bone. Still holes, but that's normal holes. And that's the trabeculae I was talking about. You see this? That's trabeculae. This is normal. Now this is the thinning of the bone. Big holes, too much. So that's why when someone breaks their hip, everyone, they break the spongy part of the bone, and they don't break their hip. When you hear someone broke their hip, tell them, well, don't even tell people. They'll get upset. But 99% of people don't actually break the hip bone itself, all right? Which is this is your hip bone. That is your ilium, ischium, pubis. People don't break that. They break here. They break here. They break the head of, the neck of the femur. They break their leg bone, and they call it the hip bone. It's because it's all part of the hip joint, but it's really not the hip bone. So it's a misnomer that everybody says broken hip, and it's not right. It's not a great picture. It's all right. But anyway, that's the same as the book. I didn't like as much the one in the book, so I wanted you to see that. Anyway, moving along, osteoporosis. So now you see the picture of osteoporosis, thinning of the bone. What it is it's an easy definition. Osteoporosis is thinning of the bone, and it occurs when osteoclast activity is greater than osteoblast activity. Does that make sense? Blasts build more bone, clasts break down bone. So if clasts are the bone breaker is more active than the bone builder, that's what happens. So what's the reason? All right. Well, there's a lot of reasons. We believe not enough exercise, not enough milk when you're young. Smoking lowers estrogen. Estrogen is the female hormone. Men have it and women have it, but women have it more. When the estrogen goes down, the osteoclast activity goes up and it decreases bone mass. So usually in the vertebrae and in the femur, the neck of the femur, that's where you see most of the thinning of the bone. All right, and again, it's defined as a decreased bone mass. Spongy bone is kind of where it's the worst because it's thin already. That's what's most likely to break. So what treatments do we have? I have to talk about a few. I just will discuss a little bit about treatment. Number one, before I even go into the treatment of it, if you have a healthy diet, okay, with calcium, milk, dairy at a young age, you starting with more bone, and that's better for the person. And I want to also say, by a 4-to-1 margin, or even more, it occurs in women more than men. Okay, that's a fact. And I think it has to do with the estrogen, that's what we believe, decreasing. They tried hormone replacement therapy, and that led to more breast cancer and other blood clots, and it wasn't the best treatment in that regard. They still do HRT, hormone replacement therapy, but not the best. Okay, smoking lowers estrogen, not great. Again, lowering of estrogen means bone thinning. There's some evidence that statins or cholesterol drugs decrease osteoclast activity. In other words, increase mass. Soy. I would always ask students 10, 20 years ago, how many people eat soy products? And a lot of people, it used to be 80%. Now, very few. And soy is known as an estrogenic compound. That is a compound that brings out more estrogen. And soy is supposed to be good for improving bone loss. All right? Soy products. Can I honestly say that soy products have decreased in its popularity? Definitely. Because I believe, and this is crazy, internet fake news came out and said men that were eating a lot of soy started lactating. Now, this is getting to be a weird conversation, okay? Milk coming out of the breasts. And the reason being that they gave was that a lot of estrogen surged in the boys due to the protein from the soy. Now, I find that, terrible because soy is a good low-fat alternative to meat. And meat has a lot of fat, and too much red meat is associated with cancer, heart disease, etc. So it's a shame that gossip came around. Not that I like soy. Honestly, I don't like it. I did have some soy milk, this and that. I will try, but it's something good for people. So, hopefully that gossip didn't cause that. Anyway, so that's a little aside. Moving along, last but not least, in our discussion on strong bones, protection, we've got to discuss the role of calcium. Calcium in bone remodeling and storage. Let's talk about how calcium is controlled in the body, regulated. First of all, bone stores 99% of all the calcium in your body. And I told you calcium's got a lot of functions: enzymes, clotting, muscles, nerves, heart, you name it, calcium does it. So we have to have a strict control of blood calcium level so that other things besides just bone strength are controlled properly. Now, number one, the thyroid gland produces calcitonin. This is your hormone. The parathyroid makes PTH. That's your other hormone, okay? So two hormones that work against each other, you could say antagonistically, to raise and lower blood calcium, all right? Calcitonin decreases blood calcium. Parathyroid hormone, PTH, increases blood calcium. How does calcitonin lower blood calcium? Well, close your eyes and visualize. What do you want to absorb blood calcium? The bones, right? So osteoblasts are going to increase and osteoclasts are going to decrease when calcitonin is released. Now, why does that make common sense? Because the bone acts like a sponge to suck up the calcium from the blood, right? So let's be honest, physiology is a lot of common sense, less memory. And you guys are going to love A&P 2 because A&P 2 is more figuring it out and less memorizing. So to make a long story short, and even though the tests are open book, you still got to go through a lot of material. It's still not easy. Let me tell you what you guys had to do. So I'm proud of you for the hard work that you've done. But don't memorize this chart. Think about it. Think about what makes sense. Let's look at parathyroid. How do you increase blood calcium level? You're going to do the opposite. PTH, right, made by the parathyroid gland, parathyroid hormone. If you get that wrong on the test, that's it. I'm just going to jump through the screen and say, naughty. PTH is parathyroid hormone. Who makes it? The parathyroid gland, all right? So PTH, made by the parathyroid gland, is released when there's low blood calcium. It detects it. Parathyroids are in your neck. So is the thyroid. The thyroid is this butterfly-looking creature in your neck, and parathyroids are little dots. The little dots detect low blood calcium level, make PTH, and cause blood calcium level to go up. What are you going to do? You're going to break down the bone to release the calcium from that bone and send it into the blood for use. So osteoclast activity increases with parathyroid hormone to break down the bone and give calcium into the bloodstream. Similarly, the kidneys are going to recover more calcium from the urine, so you're going to pee out less, so you have higher blood calcium. Calcitonin is going to act the opposite way. What else is PTH going to do? It's going to get rid of more phosphorus. Now, this is a weird thought. Less phosphorus increases blood calcium. In figure 14.36, I have a picture of a soda can. Sodas have a lot of phosphorus. They literally connect with calcium and leach out, urinate out of your system and cause more bone thinning. Soda is terrible for bones, all right? I mean, you're not going to have a soda and then it's going to affect you overnight, but it's long-term. What you do long-term is the problem. And phosphorus leaches out calcium, thinning the bone, making acting as a possible contributor to osteoporosis. And it's this physiology that you see before you that makes sense, right? The antagonism between calcitonin and PTH in controlling blood calcium levels. Last but not least, I want to talk about other hormones involved in growth. Human growth hormone and thyroxine act together, we say synergistically, to grow children from infancy to childhood up and through puberty. Your growth of your bones, length and width, is due to human growth hormone and thyroxine. Thyroxine, you know, is a metabolism hormone. Your thyroid gives out thyroxine to control metabolism in your body. Metabolism means all the chemical reactions happening in your body. Together, they work to help you to grow. You know, cretinism is dwarfism as a result of lack of thyroxine. Not enough thyroxine, you have the human growth hormone, but you don't have the thyroxine to help you to grow. So both of these hormones are very important in bone development. Human growth hormone is very controversial. If you know you're going to, all they have to do is take an x-ray and see your epiphyseal plate, right? Your growth plate, and they see how tall you're going to be. If you know you're going to be 5'3" and you're a man, should you take human growth hormone? Should mom and dad give it to you? Very controversial. Or do you let nature take its course? And so I want to ask, you know, what would you do? What would you do? Let's put the screen up, and you can feel free to participate. You know, how many of you would tell your kid, if they're going to be 5'3", you know, your son, to take human growth hormone to be taller? Anyone want to? I'll put the share on. Hold on. You feel free to chat if you want. Would you tell your kid to take human growth hormone? Just say yes or no. A couple of people. Human growth hormone, I would just give them the option. Well, they're kind of young. No, some people. Interesting. Don't take it. All right. Give them the option. All right. You know, 5'3" is not too short, but they do go through some, you know, some problems being short. People, you know, can discriminate. Okay, how many men would date a shorter woman? You know, for the men in the class, you can answer. Anyone want to answer? No one's answering. Well, you know, usually most men would date a shorter woman. How many women would date? Oh, yes. All right, Matt Murphy, yes. All right, now how many women in the class would date a shorter man than them. You can say it depends on the individual. I understand that. But just, give me your general preference. Not to, no, I won't say who, it's up there, but I'm not gonna pinpoint anyone. Definitely not. Now I gotta say to the women, how many women would date a taller man? A taller man than they are. I'm assuming the answer is yes. Yeah, the answer is so. In other words, look, another one. So you're hypocrites. You're telling the kid not to take the hormone, yet you would discriminate against the shorty. That's what I'm saying. Now, you should laugh to yourself. I don't want to pick on you. But I'm just saying these are the ethical things that I think about, I think should be in an anatomy class. Because what do you do? I'll tell you, I don't want to get into any personal relative, but I have seen some cases. And the human growth hormone has negative effects, okay, not just psychologically, but also physically. So you were kind of right in a way to be leery about telling the kid to take it. But at the same time, I like that you're honest. You're an honest class. We're going to laugh about this when we get together in our pizza party. I'm going to bring a short man in there. And, I'm just kidding. I'm going to just say that it's a bioethical issue because there are side effects. Some people swear by the human growth hormone. Some do not. Some say how horrible. So there's all kinds of cases. And I think that's the case with all of our treatments. I'll shut this down for a minute. All treatments have side effects. In every medicine, everyone, here's a golden rule of medicine, there's a little poison. Every medicine has a little poison. So you don't take any medicine lightly. And the human growth hormone, there's been joint defects, darkening of the skin, abnormal growth in, one side growing faster than another, depression. So there are negatives. There are also the positives that the person grows taller and is happy. So there are many cases, very difficult. See, it's easy to teach you what the structure of the long bone is, right? It's not easy to get into these kinds of things, the bioethical dilemmas, but you have to. You have to think about it. You're going to see that your whole life. And it's the interesting part of the course. Thank God I don't test on it, okay? That's just the discussion because really I like the facts in life. I like the facts. So let's finish. I have some tidbits for you to talk about. Before we go further, testosterone and estrogen. Obviously, the epiphyseal plate closes during puberty due to the sex hormones. You know that. During puberty, the sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen, act together, especially testosterone, and women have that too. Women and men have both of the sex hormones, just in different amounts. They act together to close the plate and grow the bones. Table talk. For dinner, you can discuss some of these facts. You replenish your bone 5 to 7% every week. Every week, the bone is recycled 5 to 7%, and you completely replace all of your spongy bone in 3 to 4 or 3 to 5 years, and you completely replace all of your compact bone every decade. So in the time that we talk, honestly, I've been at Delhi almost 20 years. That means I have replaced my skeleton twice, if you really want to know. You continually remodel. And of course, what is bone deposit? It's based on, and people always get confused by this, it's based on the osteocytes having enough calcium, right? And I made it as an ion, calcium +2, and phosphorus, I put a little I. I means inorganic, okay? It's not important. But calcium ion and inorganic phosphate are needed with the osteocytes to deposit bone. You got to have it. If you don't have enough, we call it bone resorption. That means the bone reabsorbs and you have bone thinning. So that is how bone remodels. That is how bone grows. You got to have the hormones. You have to have the forces placed upon them. You got to have the proper nutrients, calcium and phosphorus. And all of this works in concert. So the body is complex. Hopefully you enjoyed the lecture. I'm going to stop the recording because now I'm done and we can just take questions and relax. We're at exactly 10:01.